All right, here we go. I am pleased to welcome everyone here tonight. We're working through a little bit of technical issues as we're trying to load up the PowerPoint that just came to us this evening. My name is Ben Webber. I'm the president of Manheim Township Historical Society. I'm so glad to see so many of you here, familiar faces and new faces. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Tonight, our basic agenda is we're going to have a short meeting of the annual membership. Tonight is our annual membership meeting of the Manheim Township Historical Society. We'll have a few updates for you about that. And then we'll be getting into the program that I'm sure all of you are very interested in hearing about, and that's the Stehli Silk Mill, both the future as well as the past, the history of it. I'll be handling the history, and Angelo, sorry, Mark's your dad? Okay, good, got that part. So Angelo will be describing and walking us through what the future of the Stehli Silk Mill is going to be. Then after the program, we'll have a brief time of questions and answers, Q&A. Again, no inappropriate questions, please, or none that we can't answer. The other part is then we will have a short meeting of our board of directors. And you're welcome to stay, but I'm pretty sure nobody here wants to listen to us deliberate about the meeting minutes from our April meeting. So you're encouraged, please, to leave at least to the lobby, check out things in the library, and make your way home safely. We do need the room to have our board meeting as soon as we're concluded. And this is taking an awful long time to load up. Oh boy.
They have good internet?
Thank you for asking that. They do have good internet here. This is we're working off of a laptop. The file is already loaded on, and it's just trying to open it into PowerPoint. So with that, we're going to wait for technology to pick up, but let me jump into the issues surrounding the Manheim Township Historical Society. We are, if you don't know, the advocate for historic preservation here in Manheim Township. We work both with the township government as well as Historic Preservation Trust. We collaborate with the Landis Valley Farm Museum, with other adjacent municipal historical commissions and historical societies, but we are entirely based on donations. We do get funding from a community foundation trust that was set up for preservation of the Stoner House, which is open every Saturday, April through December. So please come to the Stoner House on Saturdays from 10 to 1. But as I mentioned, we are donation based, so please visit our website, make a donation. If you are a recurring member of our Historical Society, this is a reminder to pay up your dues. So please, I please do ask you to do that. In this past year, we've been working to increase our collaboration, as I said, with other agencies, as well as having an online resource. We have a very good website. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, but we're also developing a series of online images, documents that people can come in and do research. We're receiving a lot of information as well from various people out there who know that we are a presence. They're providing donations of documents, of resources, artifacts that we're pulling together into our catalogs and our archives. So we're doing a lot of the important work. And every May, we have our annual membership meeting, which is tonight. And one of the things that we throw open is to receive any input from any standing member of the Historical Society, any input at all. So if anyone has suggestions, you can feel free to send them via email, or if there's suggestions that people have right now. The floor is open. floor is closed. Okay. So y'all are thinking we're doing a bang-up job. That's great. I really do want to celebrate Debbie Franz for her pulling together programs such as we're having tonight. To be so interested and engaged, energetic, she is a force of nature. So a round of applause to Debbie Franz for pulling together. There'll also be a number of resources that are being used. The Lancaster Newspaper Archives, Lancaster History, they've provided various number of resources, so I want to thank them as well. With that, I'm not positive what's going on with the laptop here. Wish that I could, it's just not responding. Sure. Yep.
Yeah. How do you have it? It's on a flash drive.
It's on the desktop. Yeah. You want to give that a try? All right. So, Sam, I don't think you're needing this for your intro, so why don't you go ahead? Sam Meekum, former Manheim Township Commissioner, as well as past president of the Manheim Township Historical Society.
Well, folks, welcome to the meeting. This is the annual meeting of the Manheim Township Historical Society. The main thing, and the reason why you're all here, is an interest in the Stehli Silk Mill. I have to use all my power to resist dropping historical, trivial details out myself, because Ben is going to do that later. Microphone, yes.
Test 1, 2. Anyway, I spent 8 years as a township commissioner. The first one of those years was 2014, when I went to the Stehli Silk Mill with the township manager and with Lisa Douglas, the zoning director of Manheim Township. There was nothing there except pigeon droppings all over the place. The roof, to the credit of the previous owner, had been replaced at some expense. So the bones of the buildings, or at least one of the buildings, were good, including the 883-foot long building that goes along, I guess it's Martha Avenue, the big one. In any event, there was a realtor attempting to market the property at that time, but it wasn't going anywhere. And by the time 2018 rolled around, we had a meeting like this at the Manor, Armstrong Manor on Lidditz Pike. Had a standing room only crowd, people sitting there, were not enough chairs to accommodate everyone. So there was huge interest, but nothing happened. But then 6 months later, a fellow by the name of Larry Silverstein, for the first time in my experience, was in touch with the township commissioners, who were at that point putting pressure on the then owner to do something about all the broken windows. The property was being demolished by neglect, blighted, and so forth. It would have cost an enormous amount of money just to board up the windows, but in any event, Mr. Silverstein was on this conference call, no lawyers, a very refreshingly open guy, said he had a plan to take over the project. He was going to put polyvinyl on the windows. And in fact, this fellow, we did a little research on him, is a veteran developer who had done multiple infill projects of repurposing properties in Baltimore. And there's a lot of old brick buildings in Baltimore. I believe his company was then called the Union Box Company, if I'm not wrong about that. Another thing that Mr. Silverstein did was he was one of the major developers of the Pontiac Mill project, the Fruit of the Loom factory in Warwick, Rhode Island. Similar kind of project to this, and we knew that this was the kind of person that we were going to have to get to do this. After dozens and thousands of phone calls and emails to people, we concluded that we needed to get a developer from out of the area to undertake this project. So he is not here personally, he's in Rhode Island tonight, but he has his partner, which is Angelo Munofo, who's with CAM Construction, and I believe the name of the actual entity doing the development is 9th Street Capital. 9th Street Capital. Anyway, the other speaker, of course, is Ben Webber, who went to the Milton J. Breck School in the Lidditz Pike way back when. Yeah, as did I. Caleb Booker was the principal of the Breck School when I was there, by the way, in case you need to know that. He has a school named after him. Ben graduated from Township in 1979. He He's the Lancaster Township engineer by profession, but he lives in Manheim Township, so that's how we get him to be the president of the Manheim Township Historical Society. Ben is a regular presenter of interesting historical factoids and subjects such as his talks about the Conestoga River, the lock system, and not to mention the Lincoln Highway, which is connected with those little stone markers that you see that are very historic. In any event, it's now cool enough in this room that I think we can all relax and turn the program over to Ben.
Thank you. We're doing. Okay, both of them are loaded? Oh, great. Thank you, Kate. All right.
Don't go away.
Yeah.
Just don't touch any buttons in your phone.
All right, I'm gonna have to flip through a couple things that I already told you. Yes, I didn't forget that, good, all right, keep going, good. See, you're getting the whole summary. All right, yeah, did you see that thing about dues and donations? All right, and hey, Sam, we're all caught up. We're ahead of schedule, okay. All right, so the history of Stehli Silk Mill. You'll see above the picture, aerial image of the Stehli Silk Mill as it once was. And there's, as you can see, the upper image shows that much of it still remains. So that's why it's so enticing for us to want to preserve it, for us to want to see it adapted. And this is so exciting because both of those things are going to be happening soon. But I always need to go back to what it was before. I'm going to skip, the Ice Age and pre-colonial and so forth, and drop you right into 1875, when Manheim Township was largely agrarian. It was mostly farms. There were a few roads here and there. There were businesses. There were small villages. There was a village you'll see up here, Binkley's Bridge, PO. That was a Binkley's Bridge post office. That's where there was a bridge across the Conestoga River, New Holland Pike. There used to be a little village there. Eden, of course, you recognize. Roseville, you can see. But there was also a lot of farmland. Now, you can see the New Holland Pike here is running out of the city. And the picture above is a picture of the New Holland Pike at Fountain Avenue. Just settle that in for a little bit, okay? Now, not a photograph, but this enchanting image of the McGran family's Grandview farm. That's also Fountain Avenue and New Holland Pike. Some liberties were taken, I'm sure, by the illustrator. But you can see the fountain that once was at Fountain Avenue and New Holland Pike. Wow. New Holland Turnpike, of course, was a major thoroughfare. It was one of the earliest roads through Manheim Township, but it wasn't built initially by the white European colonial settlers. It was improved from an indigenous people's pathway that was there for a long time. Oops, sorry. Yes, so this little red star down here is where the Stehli Silk Mill is going to be occurring very shortly. And you see it's just slightly outside of Manheim, out of the city. The property itself does fall a little bit within that city's square. Now, you've got to recall the time frame of what we're setting out. In 1897, the industrialization was in full force. We had our telegraph, we had our telephone, we had the railroad, the light bulb had just been invented. We hadn't yet seen the Wright brothers fly the airplane, but things were happening. It was an incredible time of change. The agricultural industry was going through huge changes, lots of labor-saving devices, but still we wanted more. We wanted to see our community thrive. And in 1897, the Stehli Silk Mill was enticed to come to Lancaster. And it was, Angelo, you probably will feel the pain of this, it was within days that they got all of their approvals to build. Our most renowned architect in Lancaster, C. Emlyn Urban, designed the initial structure. I'm not saying he did a grandiose job and made it look very ornate, such as the Stevens School or the Grice Building or some various other things, but I'm pretty sure that Urban wanted to have his name on that building. And he was the architect for the initial building that was created. But not only was there this hubbub to encourage Stehli to come here, but the land was provided to them for free, for nothing, absolutely free. Tons and tons and tons of bricks and other building material were made available to them. And a railroad siding was provided to encourage them. This was all part of the offer that beat out 50 other competing cities. So everybody was trying to get the folks from Switzerland to move to their location. So it really was quite a contest. We wanted those jobs. Now by 1920, that's hardly 20 years later, the employment at Stehli hit its peak at 2,100 employees. You see a few of them there in this colorized photo that shows some of the looms and the workers that were at Stehli. And those workers needed places to live. So there was a big housing boom that was related to this. Other commercial operations resulted from that. Stores, various building industries to create these homes. It was a real boom time for Manheim Township as well as for the city. Stehli did go on to build other plants in Pennsylvania. There was one here, another one in Manheim, PA. I don't know if they were confused, as many of us are today, between Manheim and Manheim Township. Perhaps they thought they were building it closer. But then also in Virginia, there were 2 plants, another one in North Carolina. But the Stehli Silk Mill on Martha Avenue in Manheim Township remained its largest. The incredible employee amenities that were here are really astounding. You see this beautiful open campus. Can you imagine walking into work at a place like this? You just must have felt a sense of hustle and bustle that you were going to be part of something really, really unique, really fun. And then this, the ladies' dining hall. That is a building that you're going to see multiple times. You perhaps can notice that from the upper area, this way, sorry, there is a streak of light coming through. Now that is through what's architecturally called a clear story. That's an upper area that has windows, and the windows allow light to come in. It's used a lot of time in churches and so forth, but it's used in industrial plants as well to provide natural lighting. That clear story is essentially this. So this structure here is the ladies' cafeteria, and it has that clear story above it. You'll see that over and over again as we go through. Just for orientation, the Martha Avenue face of the building is that way, and this is this Plum Street or Marshall? Thank you. I should have looked that up earlier. The gardens out at the Stehli Silk Mill were just wondrous. You just look at all of the roses that were planted and then manicured against the face of the cafeteria. There were pergolas and fish ponds. People would go out and eat their lunch outside. It just must have been a marvelous sight to see. But in the Roaring '20s, the Stehli Silk Mill really hit off its production with its silk prints that were called the Americana line. And this was highly influential all throughout the United States as well as in Europe. It was the Stehli Silk Mill's Americana series were really well received. I think some of you might know this image as the It Girl. You know, she had it, whatever it was, but this gal, she definitely had a Stehli Silk Mill, Stehli Silk dress. And the prints that they had also just spun off of a wide variety of different themes, all for that Americana line, which was very, very popular. The neighborhood, Rossmere, also had a number of really interesting results. So not many people know that there used to be a baseball field, a stadium, that was right close by in Rossmere. Up above, you can see the Lancaster Catholic High School and the old Rossmere Hotel that was where the ODC complex is. That was then converted to a sanatorium for treating of tuberculosis. There was a trolley line that ran through the neighborhood to bring employees to and from the Stehli Silk Mill and the other operations that were in the Rossmere area. Now the building itself, like I said, isn't all that ornate, but it is massive. It's nearly 900 feet long. So that's 3 football fields, if you will. It's huge, and its growth and impact, significance on the area is really just what makes it such a significant treasure. So as Sam was mentioning, in 2014, that's the year that the Stehli Silk Mill achieved listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Now you might think the National Register of Historic Places is going to make something saved. Unfortunately, it's all carrot and no stick. So you get all the premiere that you want out of it, but it's really does not come with any restrictions or obligations. So in summary, I just would like to point out the number of people who were impacted in their lives. There were so many employees, families. The complex itself provided, like I said, jobs and really developed new technologies and celebrated a lot of the societal trends that hadn't really been heard of before. It really was pretty remarkable. Over time, though, in the 1940s, the rayon and nylon synthetic fabrics, they sort of pushed silks out of the way as a cheaper and more robust material. Ultimately, Stehli Silk Mill shut down in the mid-1950s. The building was used by RCA as well as several other users over time, and then has been vacant since at least the 1970s, I believe. But there are some interesting images, some things that are starting to happen. There's a construction fence going up. Angelo, in case you didn't know, this is your cue, so you might want to make your way up. And here's this picture of the gardens, and I went out there last week, and there are definitely some things happening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Angelo, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I'm going to try get over to yours. See any other one? Katie?
Where's it?
Katie! Oh my God! Is this all ready to go, do you think?
Yeah, I think
I tried opening it before. Do you think it's
We're
open?
gonna plug this. Yeah, that just takes a second.
Okay, so I'm gonna Control W this. Close it.
So this is a different file? Or
This is the one I've already read through. Yep.
So last time I hit.
Okay, yeah. Over here.
And so I said,
Okay. What was the non-soup part? Text.
Question, perhaps you. Question. Where did the labor come from? Switzerland or the?
people here.
Oh, here.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Just a little bit.
We're working on the AC. It's a little robust.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today, and really appreciate it. It's so nice to see a good turnout at something like this. So I'm standing in for my business partner, Larry Silverstein, who is actually childhood friends of my father, who runs Camp Construction. So they rode the bus together down the Baltimore area, went to school together, and Larry started doing developments in the late 90s in the Fells Point Historical District of Baltimore, and had approached my father about serving as his builder. So thus started a long-standing relationship of partnering on developments together. And kind of in recent years, I guess it was the 2015 time frame, they got into the Pontiac Mills project together up in Rhode Island that was mentioned, which is another 250,000 square foot textile mill from the 1860s actually, that was originally started as a factory to make Union Army uniforms for the Civil War. So that was another very cool and complex project that my dad and Larry partnered on, and then this opportunity arose a few years ago, and they delved into it and realized there was a lot of similarities, and came with its own unique challenges and opportunities. So we're excited to finally be under construction and hitting the ground running. I'll give a little quick background on so what we're going to go through here. We're going to show some other example products of what we do as developers, just for some context on what a finished product might look like for some aspects of the mill. I didn't include any historical pics here because that might cover those. Then we've got some befores, progress pics, and some renderings as well in here. So our firm, as a developer, Knight Street Capital, we do a lot of adaptive reuse multifamily, as well as mixed-use commercial as a component of our projects. Larry did do a handful of commercial-only repurposings in Baltimore. He took an old tack factory, and now it's a home of a golf simulator business. He took another one called the Fallsway Spring Company building and turned it into a mixed-use bowling alley and restaurant and office space, and a handful of other things around the city. And so those are kind of two of the pillars of our development work. And then as a builder, Camp Construction, we also specialize a lot in educational work. We've done over 120 schools over the years, mostly all throughout Maryland, mostly public schools, K-12, higher ed. And we do a lot of civic projects as well. We're doing a courthouse project right now in Baltimore City, actually saving the bones of an old structure. It's about a 150,000 square foot building, and turning it into a new state-of-the-art courthouse for the district courts of Maryland. And we do parks and rec centers. We've done homeless shelters for sexually abused women. We just finished one in Bel Air, Maryland. We're doing the Maryland Food Bank, so a lot of different variations on nonprofit construction, and as well as we've done some various other mission-driven projects for nonprofits and religious organizations. So here's some images of Pontiac Mills, which was referred to, just for some kind of representative images of a final project. So that one's on the Pawtuxet River, just outside of Providence, about 15 minutes south, and 5 minutes from the airport. So really was an industrial location with some blue-collar housing nearby. Those buildings were actually in far worse shape than the Stehli Mill buildings over here. I mean, when we took them over, not a single building had a roof on it. There were three to 4 story holes through every building. There was a river running through the building in one location, for one, that had to be plugged up. And a lot more structurally unsound components. I mean, a lot more beams and columns had to be replaced. In the mill here, there isn't as much of that, thankfully, not as much water damage. But yeah, this one had about 14 different buildings on it. Stehli has more, so around probably 8 or 9 distinct feeling structures. But you can kind of see front curb appeal, parking lots, great water views. And this one had a little bit more of a mixed use component as well, just spaces that weren't well suited for apartments. So we ended up doing a brew pub in here, which has been very successful, right on the river. You can kind of see the high ceilings, exposed brick, exposed beams, production operation on one half of it, and then tap room on the other. A lot of outdoor space with seating and places for people to play cornhole and congregate. And so all throughout COVID, the outdoor space was really, really well utilized there and very popular. And then we also have some retail, kind of destination retail components there. We did a salon, hair, nail salon, a gym, a boxing studio, which it's unbelievable how popular that actually is. Groups of like 30 women that come out there every other day and they're just boxing their tails off. And then we've got a significant amount of office space that we did in the project too. On this building here on the left, that actually has the brew pub on the ground floor. Upstairs is Larry, our partner's office, as well as a few other smaller tenants, co-working type tenants, but really a nice loft feel in there. We try to keep, even on the new finishes that we built in there, a lot of exposed wood and natural light and spiral ductwork. So Larry's also working on another mill about 15 minutes west of that in West Warwick, Rhode Island right now. It's called Arctic Mill, and that's pretty much in a similar phase of construction to Stehli, maybe a few months ahead, but also on a river where he's doing another brew pub. Actually, this photo on the right, he's going to be putting back the bridge over the river there with seating on the bridge, which would be pretty neat. Yeah, and a lot of this was the Fall River, Massachusetts stone. Looks a different kind of exterior, but so a lot of parging and pointing up in a different sense that had to be done there with that stone. A lot of just getting the rust and the streaks off of too, but inside very similar bones of a building. So some other examples of buildings we've done. This is a building we own, my family in Baltimore, creative office building. The state leased from us for about 20 years, and recently we lost them as a tenant, so we decided to gut the interior back to its original character. So ripping out all the institutional kind of hospital-like finishes, all the VCT and drop ceiling in a lot of areas, and really exposing the beauty of this structure. This is also a similar building from the 1860s that had about 10 different lives. At one point it was livery stables. At one point it was for undertakers and embalmers. It was a zoo at one point that held live shows in it. There's articles we found in the Baltimore Sun about a kid getting mauled by a tiger inside this building. All kinds of crazy stuff. It was a skating rink. It was a mortgage business from the mid-1900s, and then became kind of a commercial furniture and warehouse kind of district. That area went underway, so they sold all kinds of home furnishings, and it was a design center before he had to stay in there, and then eventually converted it back to its current use, which is a lot more nonprofits and kind of social behavioral health groups and different things like that. And we have Senator Van Hollen from Maryland is actually a tenant of ours as well. And here's just one more example of a project that's earlier in our development lifespan, but we're also looking at a handful of old school properties, historic schools. So this is one in Baltimore that we just got under contract for. It's called the Institute of Notre Dame. The school sisters actually own it, the nuns, and it's from the 1860s, was added onto multiple times over the decades, but at one point was a bustling Catholic school for all girls, and it closed about 5 years ago. And so another really cool opportunity where we could do affordable housing, senior housing, and kind of save a lot of the original character of the building, from stained glass to beautiful millwork to these tin ceilings that are throughout. So all that will have to be kind of stripped. The building will have to be remediated environmentally, but I think that'll be another cool project. So kind of having gone through those sample images, we'll dive into the current project here. So I think all of you may have seen these exterior renderings that our civil engineer Ratu did. Shows kind of what the site will look like interior, and we can start to see that coming together a little bit right now from some of the aerial photos I'll show on the following slides. But really, it'll be all nice new parking facilities with islands, landscaping, trees. We're thinking of a little dog park in this triangular kind of wedge of extra space that we have here between the parking lot and the drive aisle. So hopefully we can fence something in there. We did a nice dog park up in Rhode Island as well. That's been pretty well received. And then this space just to the kind of northeast of the cafeteria building, former women's cafeteria, we're thinking that would be great outdoor patio space for a brew pub tenant. And you can see here the former boiler complex in the center as an appendage off the building. The old elevator shafts, which we're actually able to, by and large, reuse and repurpose. And yeah, so that's generally how things should come together. A couple new renderings just hot off the presses this afternoon at 5 p.m. before I left the office was from an architect that we're working with, not the main architect who did our plans, Hamill, but an architect out of Baltimore called Urban Design Group that has a lot of experience with historic tax credit projects and adaptive reuse that we've worked with in the past. But we had them come up with some marketing plans for our commercial spaces. So this is in that boiler house building. As you see here, kind of on this plan, the grayed out areas are part of the common areas for the residences. So this is where my cursor is right now would be the gym. This will be the management office. Coming in through here, we have a room for kind of pool table and TV, kind of club room, so to speak. This will be a mail room, package room over here, and this is kind of some circulation space. And there's a staircase to the upstairs that has a loft space for just tenants to kind of rent for parties and events and things like that. And the whole left-hand side of this boiler house complex, which is really a combination of probably like 10 different small buildings that all have their own historic mill numberings. This will be what we think is kind of the primary brew pub space. So we're thinking a long bar along this kind of windowless brick wall, glass garage door, and a glass storefront infill of an opening where the whole building used to connect long back in the day before we inherited the site. So we're kind of thinking of some of these larger openings that don't really have a historic representation of what you will do with them. We've kind of had to come up with a way to let natural light in the building that still feels right from a character standpoint. So hopefully we can let in a lot of that natural light in here. We've kept all the old historic piping from the boilers that as much as we can and salvage that. So I'll show a couple pictures of that, but it'll add a nice feel up in the ceiling type space high up there above the patrons. But there'll be some opportunity for kind of a brewing operation on the left-hand wing of this, and then tap room where people can sit and eat and drink. And this is a concept for the cafeteria building, the former women's dining hall. And we're not sure if this building will ultimately just potentially go to a creative office user, like some of the images on the prior slides, or if this would become the primary brew pub space, or maybe an additional brew pub space if someone wants to kind of split their operation into a couple wings and bridge it with the lawn area. But this was one idea that we would have more significant production and tanks area on one half of this space. If someone really wanted to do some canning and distribution, that we could afford that part of the space. And then we'd have a smaller area for seating, and with a kind of a small bar that people could view those tanks through the glass and kind of hang out. And then maybe do some storage space in the basement, which, so this space under here used to be the former male cafeteria. Not as beautiful, actually. You see the pictures, but still a pretty neat basement space. And this is the other concept. If this became more of a primary brew pub space, we could do a more of a central bar with two sides to it, kind of a 360-degree orientation around it, and we would kind of bring back some gang restrooms in the basement there to accommodate those. But some cool concepts. So we haven't found any particular tenant to lease it yet, but we're going to start marketing it shortly, and hopefully go to all the other breweries in town, and York and Harrisburg and Baltimore, and see if anyone wants to, who's established with a good reputation, wants to open another location that we could help do the build out for. So here's some renderings of actual what apartment units will look like here. This is just a sample apartment. Had to kind of pick one for the original illustration purposes, but And as the way the mill lays out, it's a pretty narrow building for an apartment building. It's only about 46 feet across width-wise. So we ended up having to go with kind of more horizontally laid out units than normal. A lot of apartment units tend to get very bowling alley-like, just with 2 windows on the end and kind of a long central thing so they can cram as many in as possible in a building. And that may be fine and well when you're doing a new building, but for something like this, we had to kind of optimize for the space that we had, knowing we wanted a centrally located corridor that could keep the exposed columns visible. So to kind of have a 5-foot wide corridor, we couldn't stick the column dead in the center of the corridor, so we had to pick one side to hug the columns along our corridor partition. So one half of the building is a little bit narrower units, and one half has a little deeper, kind of more standard units. This is actually the kind of more challenged, a little bit more narrow unit, but still actually very functional, lays out really nicely. I think our architect did a great job of kind of balancing all the different competing interests and finding a layout that worked really well. We decided to go this route so we could maximize the number of windows per apartment, really let in a ton of natural light, so you kind of have this great impression when you walk through the front door of your apartment unit right here. So as you can see, every living room is going to have about 4 windows right there, which is great, and they are really sizable windows too. We've got 1,400 total on the property that we have to replace, so windows alone is about a $3.5 to $4 million cost item for us here. So it's crazy, but they're really going to turn out well. We've done a couple mock-ups very recently that really turned out great, and we're working with Quaker Window to manufacture them and then accompany architectural window to do the fabrication and installation of them. So, but you can see here, nice living room layout, kitchen, one right here, stovetop, fume hood, stainless steel appliances. Little island will be an option for tenants if they want to either leave that space open or add some additional counter space. Some of our units, because it's just such a wonky building, have kind of an extra bay to them, an extra column bay. So here's an example of one that actually had an extra closet or maybe home office room on the side. So someone can kind of use that however they wish. But then as you kind of come through here, we decided to have the bathroom enclosed off of the bedroom, and then nice natural light into the bedroom as well, kind of an open closet concept. We were able to delete a lot of these chase shafts actually to even kind of be able to allow us to pick up some additional closet space and shift things over. So that was a good ability we were able to do with our HVAC company, Haller. So some pictures from inside the mill. There are a lot floating around online, but I threw a couple on here for just some talking points and some things. One really nice aspect of the mill that we have throughout are these great big old steel fire doors. So we're preserving all of those. We've stripped all of those, and through our media blasting process, really brought a lot of those back to life, and they're in great condition. So we'll keep those just hung on the wall, not operable, but just for decorative purposes to kind of see what they used to function as, to separate the different mill buildings, which were really added on over time, and each kind of function as their own independent structure. Here's kind of a typical picture of the inside of mills 1, 2, and 3 that comprise the big long building. This is kind of as we stepped into things, and it's really, a lot of it's very surface level, just old, crummy, peeled away paint. Structurally really good bones, a lot of the floorings in decent shape. Some of it where weather got in has really buckled up and isn't salvageable, so we'll have to replace in kind. Other parts of the first floor where they had forklifts and other kinds of loading equipment were actually originally done in concrete. So in those cases, we're probably just going to leave the concrete, polish it to give it a nice glossy finish and kind of make it aesthetically appealing, but it'll all have that rustic loft feel. We'll provide area rugs in the bedrooms and things like that to help soften noise. And mills 5 and 6, which is that separate T-shaped building in the back, have these steel factory style windows, which are my personal favorite actually, as opposed to the single hungs that we have over here. But so we haven't quite gotten into the media blasting and cleaning of the brick and wood in that building yet, but we will be there shortly. Our guys have been moving through it pretty swiftly and at a good clip there. That's us just looking at a sample window and kind of evaluating what to do with the awning or apron that opened up and let in fresh air, which we will still have one of those, which is a nice feature on the apartments. All of our windows will be operable as opposed to fixed, so it'll provide a lot of nice natural ventilation in the good weather months. We had these big old freight elevators in the property. Here's a picture of one before we removed the old freight cab from the interior. And we've been able to actually salvage those shafts and use them to put our new, appropriate sized residential freight elevator, commercial freight elevator, not really for like an industrial purpose. So that only takes up about half of that space. So we're using the other half of the space for like a janitor's closet, kind of utility room. So building back in a floor on each level where the elevator used to be, taking up all that space. And then we're able to use the old block shaft for the balance of it. Here's a typical picture on the third floor where we have the pitch ceiling. So you have a couple extra feet of height there. Most of our ceilings are a little over 14 foot clear. And this top floor kind of is more in the 15.5 foot to almost 16 foot height range at the center point. So this top floor, we're leaving fully exposed ceilings in the apartments and in the corridors because we don't have any residents above to worry about for sound, and the roof is well insulated. And the floors down below, we were forced to add drywall ceilings in between the beams of the apartments so we could insulate them and kind of provide some sound separation between the floors. So we'll still have all exposed wood beams inside the apartments, and then the hallways, you'll see that's where we've been media blasting to remove the old paint, and those will stay fully exposed. You'll see full height. But there'll be no actual drop ceilings. Even the drywall will be clinging right to the old wood of the underside of the floor above. So it's providing a really nice look where you kind of get a blend of those two aesthetics. This picture on the bottom left is a neat one I just included because later there's a picture of what we've done in that area from a site work standpoint. You actually see the old foundation wall of one of the buildings that had been torn down, I guess, long ago. This, I think, was kind of where the rail yard came in, and there was some support buildings for the rails there. And so these foundations had been left from long ago. And we've been digging up a number of old foundations as well for like the Mill 4 building, the old sawtooth style roofed building that was torn down prior to us coming in. And those areas are all going to be used and needed for parking to meet the parking requirements we need anyhow. So as sad as it is to lose a building, it might have been hard to make the site make sense for residential with the appropriate amount of parking spaces otherwise. So we've had to demo all this old concrete wall and foundations, and we were able to actually crush that material up and use it as fill on the site and save that material just to be sustainable and efficient with our resources there. And this photo on the bottom right-hand corner is just a funny picture of a sign that used to be nailed throughout the mill in a lot of places. I hope we were able to save one because my dad always was pointing it out, but you can see that there's over 300 pounds per square foot of floor loading, which is really a significant amount of floor loading capacity as compared to how buildings are designed today. So it just gives you a sense that even for a timber frame structure, they had these many thousand-pound looms that were sitting as dead weight on all these floors. So the building really had to be designed like a fortress with a really thick floor section. You've got surface level boards, and then you've got these thicker subfloor boards that are 6 inches wide that go 2 layers deep in most cases. So when you cut through, you can really see how thick the sections were. So I guess a reason of why this building has stood the test of time for over 100 years, even being vacant for 40, 50 years. So here's kind of pictures of the inside now of what we've done thus far from a media blasting standpoint. We have this company, Stolfus, IK Stolfus, in here, who's done a great job thus far. They use kind of a different blend of materials to help strip the old paint off of the surfaces, and then they collect that material, they suck it up, and then kind of move it and reuse it throughout the mill. So they've done the entirety of mills 1 and 2 in the amenity complex at this point, the boiler building, as well as the old women's cafeteria, and I believe they're working through mill number 3 right now. But as you can see, this top floor really, transforms back from this view down here to this view right here. It's pretty amazing. It looks like new construction almost from the wood, almost like the underside of a ship or something, like a hull of a boat. It's pretty neat there. We've taken all these old steel brackets at the tops and bottoms of each column and been kind of hand painting it with one of our guys to kind of paint them black to make those pop. We painted some of the old abandoned sprinkler pipe as well, black. Like you can see in this right picture here. And we'll save that wherever we can, where it doesn't become a sound issue for sound transmission or in the way of any walls, new drywall partitions going in. But we love keeping as much as we possibly can of the old character just because it's really what makes it so unique of a building. Kind of looking down here, we love how these old stairwells have been turning out too. We're keeping all the original stairwells that were in between each of the mill buildings. So we have one on the end of Mill 1, in between the cafeteria building and Mill 1. Then we've got one in between Mills 1 and 2, and one in between Mills 2 and 3. And then there's additional in the T-shaped building, Mills 5 and 6. But really, all this original woodworking, the original railings, everything we've been able to save here. Even the stair treads are in awesome shape. So, I mean, you could remake this if you wanted to these days. And there's kind of these plaster underpinnings to the stairs that everything really cleaned up nicely. So these are going to be big, wide open stairwells that the residents will be able to use. And it's a fairly low-rise building, so we imagine a lot of people, will take the stairs just if it's just 1 to 2 levels up, and pretty conveniently located. We'll even add some seating areas in these stairwells because they extend well beyond the landings do, well beyond the stair that you see right there. So it's actually a great gathering space too, and kind of a small lounge space on each floor. Again, you can see kind of sand media blasted fire doors here and old steel beams where they used to hoist things in from the outside, where instead of windows in some places you had these double doors that were even at elevation. They would bring in materials, raw materials, and probably bring things out of the building as well. And the doors are really just phenomenal there. So that'll likely end up in someone's apartment, which is pretty cool. And kind of see another image of another area where that condition occurs right here. So you have some really unique conditions on the ends of each mill building where you might have an extra bedroom in kind of a brick kind of compartment that may have formerly been a bathroom or something like that. And once we've ripped out those old kind of bathroom, public bathroom finishes, now you've just got a really cool brick room that can be used. This is kind of an image in one of those. So some will become home offices or large closets, others could actually be a full bedroom. Here's some kind of back-to-back photos in a couple areas. Just wanted to point out. This is in that former women's dining hall, or otherwise known as Mill 21. So looking at the clear story restoration that was done here, and the old steel beams as they were cleaned and painted so they wouldn't oxidize and rust. We decided to kind of paint those in a neutral gray tone and then paint the bolts black so they kind of pop and really show through there. So a ton of natural light. These are all original light monitors that we will just probably reglaze and keep, actually kind of keep the windows themselves there and just kind of reglaze. They're actually, it's one of the areas that they were in good shape. Almost every other window has to actually be replaced in its entirety, but here, given their height, they never were able to, the vandals weren't able to throw stones that high, I guess, somehow, but so, on that point, if any of you want to be good neighborhood watchmen, we definitely could use the eyeballs on the streets at night. We've got security cameras in a couple different locations in the front of Mill 2 and then on the other entrances that have flashing lights and loudspeakers and surveillance at night of people remote monitoring. And they've actually been pretty successful at being able to speak to people to deter them to get off the property when they've caught folks in caught motion and been alerted, and we've gotten folks to come. But it's amazing how people will just roll under the fence or go through such great lengths to get in to cause trouble or graffiti over the stuff we just cleaned, unfortunately. But it comes with the territory, certainly, and as more and more activity comes to the site, we're confident that that will continue to trickle down, hopefully. When we did walkthroughs of the site over the past couple of years, my dad always told me, like, bring a sharp stick and find some sharp object as you're walking through the mill, because we've had people pop out of the mill, living in the mill, who just around the corner. Imagine how shocking that would be, and expecting to see someone there with, they don't mean any trouble per se, but you just got to protect yourself because you don't know if someone's crazy. So thankfully that's all ended past those days. So a lot safer now, and the fence seems to be doing just okay. One of the other really cool features I do want to point out that really came through and became apparent as we worked through this media blasting process was these old turnbuckles that were done here. So you can kind of see on this top right-hand picture these brackets on some of the beams. So this is actually an image of multiple beams that were spliced together over time, I guess, as they either had a failure or something. But in a few select locations on the top floor, you can see there was actually a cut done in the beam, and then they did this method appropriately of fastening it all together to splice it. And when we got rid of the old caked layers of paint, it's amazing to reveal what was there, that old steel. It is beautiful, yeah. And another unique feature of this mill that was very advanced architecturally, kind of engineering-wise for the time, was these wind tie-downs on the top floor to prevent uplift in the building. So to even be sensitive about wind loads and wind shear was pretty advanced for the 1880s and 90s. You don't see a whole lot of this, but it became very evident as we've cleaned off the brick, all of these steel pull downs, which are really meant to keep the roof from lifting up and pulling the building up if there were ever some bad wind event or hurricane or something that blew through here. So these are all throughout the top floor, and it's a nice aesthetic feature at this point. But they were installed at the anchor points of every single beam to the exterior wall. So we've been painting those black as well to kind of feature them. These spaces down here are, so this is one of the potential brew pub spaces in that boiler, the kind of southern half of that boiler complex. You can see here was kind of the before, getting rid of the old paint and cleaning up everything. And this is kind of the now condition. And similarly here was in what we're going to use as our part of our club room and fitness center, and this is kind of the after. So there was a lot of rebuilding of these clear stories required. These are some of the most deteriorated parts of the mill, was the old boiler complex. So one of our longtime carpenters and superintendents who's on site now, Jeff Lapp, he's done a great job and really taking this as a labor of love, this project. So before we ever were able to close on our construction loan and really commence work in earnest, he spent weekends for a full year out here with his sons, just handcrafting these new, rebuilding these new roof framing, roof decking, and clear stories, and replicating all of it. They basically removed what was there from the buildings, and then kind of just replicated and replaced and combined where possible. So there's a lot more evidences of it here in these parts of the amenity center. So these are all big parts of the apartments themselves, will be accessible by the apartment residents themselves. They won't be leased out spaces. So here is what will become our management office. These two images in the top left. We're kind of trying to decide what to do with the different floor pitches and grades there, and that's always one of the challenges with these, is you have these different concrete pours that happen over different periods of time. So how do you make everything ADA accessible and kind of make things communicate seamlessly throughout these different added on buildings? So you end up kind of infilling and bringing certain things up to certain levels, and having certain ramps and slopes. But so we were kind of working out some of those details in the field the other week. And these three pictures in the top right are that rentable tenant club room on the second floor of the boiler house complex. So this is kind of the passageway through to the interior of Mill 2, which will all be kind of part of this space, where during the day it can just be a hangout place for residents, couches, TV, library. We're going to throw a wet bar up here, so people could rent this out for birthday parties and other celebrations and events and things like that. This area really cleaned up well, and this roof structure, we were told that it used to be where they used to grow silk, and it was a bit translucent when we took it over. So I think they actually had a kind of a growing operation for silkworms up here. So it was a pretty neat. It was a different material entirely, different, very light gauge roof truss here, as you can see. We were assured by our structural engineer that it was all sound for kind of a lightweight wood deck to be put on it. But when we took it over, it was a pretty much collapsed in, translucent kind of polyurethane looking structure. So it was very, very interesting up there. Will be a cool space though, certainly a lot of natural light. And down here will be our mail room, this compartment on the left. This is again like a TV room with a billiard table will go into this slot. And then this space right here is the brew pub, another part of the brew pub space in the boiler building. And this space right here is a hallway that leads into the apartment building from the boiler complex. And again, here are some rebuild of the clear stories kind of shown. This is in the women's cafeteria space, which is really transformed nicely. Just great steel work, great wood on display, a lot of windows. So these windows are all 3/4 boarded up right now. So it's not the best representation of how the space will feel at the end of the day. So they're just boarded up for security reasons and to keep people from physically getting in, graffitiing more things. But once these windows themselves get replaced, which should happen, in the near future, hopefully, as this will be part that's opening with the first phase of units, it'll really change this space. We're thinking this may become a glass garage door, depending if we even need more natural light or not. But and these windows will all be just replaced in kind, matching the exact light pattern on there. Here's another clear story. These were all ones that Jeff did in our in-house team here. This is kind of some of the evidence of that, like piping and whatnot that I was describing earlier. This was pre-media blasting, so you still see some of the white paint and kind of inconsistent roof colors there, but a lot of really cool old boiler piping that we're going to be able to preserve. And really cool old wood doors in some cases as well that we've been finding that we'd like to keep wherever possible if they're in exterior condition. I mean, just great, slat work and stuff that you wouldn't see really today in modern construction. Even the old locking hardware was still intact. This was the male cafeteria, so as you can see, not as glamorous. It's a little bit more of a dungeon, but we're using half of that for our utility room for the building. So that's where all of our electrical services are coming in for Mill 1. All kinds of different building main systems there. And then the other half of that will either become game restrooms or just storage space for the complex, depending on what kind of tenant we get in this space up here right next door to it. Here was a cool picture inside of part of the boiler building, the leasable space, where they used to have another big hoist where they have tanks and things hanging from it, and they pick up equipment. So really just awesome, unique stuff here. So going through a couple of the phasing of construction things, because it is pretty neat, and just this slide really just illustrates all the underground plumbing required for your drains and sanitary and getting that throughout the building. So in the areas on the first floor where there was concrete, like I mentioned, here it was actually concrete cutting, and you can see the layout was done there, and the busting up of the concrete, and actually setting of all the pipes and plumbing boxes, plumbing trenches, and then ultimately pouring it back. And the match has been pretty incredible so far. As you can see on these two bottom right-hand pictures, it's fairly indistinguishable where that was removed. Just tapping that here. And then, framing is underway, well underway. We've got, here's a corridor wall being framed. This is from the inside of an apartment, so those columns are actually exposed within a corridor. So we're standing inside an apartment there looking out towards a corridor. Here's a similar picture. You can see here in these two pictures on the right, where the small drywall ceilings will be installed in between the beams. But as you can see right here in a hallway, this will all be exposed wood still. This is how the National Park Service had us do it. And that top floor will really be the primo units with fully exposed wood. So yeah, I mean, you can see nice spacious bedrooms here, spacious closet space. We've been doing field meetings on site regularly with all the MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing coordination that needs to take place there. Because really it was a lot of undertaking of figuring out who was going to run pipe where in the ceiling, and logistically coordinating all that between the trades was a key step to get things rolling here. Some more images of apartments being framed out here. My dad's standing in a closet. An old elevator shaft where we demoed one of the old elevators. This one actually was too small of an elevator shaft to put a new elevator back. So this is the ones where we can put them back in there. This was a little bit too small to get a commercial grade elevator. We were like 6 inches to a foot short, and we went to every brand. So in this area, we were just deciding, well, we'll just make this a cool little room within an apartment. I guess we'll infill the floor, and 3 apartments, we'll get something kind of a special little add-on room. And but yeah, that's kind of our philosophy about these things, is where there's found spaces, just leave them and don't try to close them off and let someone take advantage of them and enjoy them. This detail over here on the top right, I included just as an example of what we're doing for sound attenuation purposes. A trick that Larry's learned over the years with old mill properties is recessing the metal stud track in the floor. So cutting away that top layer of flooring down to the subfloor, laying a foam pad down underneath the stud, and then actually drilling in, nailing in the stud's track on top of this pad. So it's inlaid in the floor, so sound won't as easily skirt right under the wall between apartments. It would have to go under, a void and somehow get up back over. So it's never going to be perfect in an old building. We think that is one easy step that we can do to try to kind of help sound attenuation between apartments and make it a more pleasant environment. Just little tricks of the trade there. So some images of site work here. The first step when we took over the site and really let DH Funk loose, who's our site contractor up here. They've been doing an amazing job local up here. So glad we got together with them. Was really just stripping the site of all the old, what was left of busted up pavement, or slabs of buildings or grass. There was actually a lot of trees kind of in a little overgrown grove towards the back of the property that we removed, where and this kind of was in this zone right here off the railroad tracks. Now this will become our primary surface stormwater management pond back here, and that's already progressed since when this picture was taken. But yeah, we cleared the site. Here's where you can see that foundation wall being demoed for that old building that was no longer there, where the rail tracks were. Yeah, it's really cool, the historical pictures we see where you actually allowed trains to come into the site, load, had buildings on either side of them to dump things in, and then could then exit the site. We had someone reach out with a cool engraving, like printing press kind of engraving of the whole site map, which showed some old buildings and staging areas and labeled everything that some things we weren't even aware of. So I have that in my office back home, but it's a really cool device. We'd like to kind of actually get a proper print made with it with ink at some point, but it's in good shape. But it showed what was in this area here, which was really kind of just wasteland by the time we took it over. So it's really always fun and fascinating to find out the old, where old buildings and old little outcropping structures used to be on a site. And you encounter all of those utility lines that used to feed those buildings, and that's been one of the real challenges of this site, was that it's not like we're taking over a paved site or something that you can kind of just repurpose the buildings, which is often as it is in a more urban environment. Here, it's truly kind of, the site was a bit of the Wild West when it came to utilities and water and what was going around the site, where it was really Swiss cheese of old water lines running around here that we've had to cap off and remove, and there's hydrants all internal to the site. So it really was its own little town, kind of self-sustaining community, which has just presented its challenges as you dig things up under the surface and find, oh, here's got a water line here, and you end up creating a geyser under the plant. But we've worked through it all, and it's just because everyone's like, why was a water line going here? Well, because there used to be a little building here. It doesn't make any sense now, but when you think back, it does. And here's an image of the crusher here, getting rid of the old concrete. And these are some good aerial images, kind of from upper floors of mills 5 and 6, looking down at the site. All of our large corrugated stormwater pipe that's being installed in the infiltration beds. So because this is such though it seems like a big site, it's really kind of a tight site to fit everything in it that we needed to, development-wise, in terms of the appropriate amount of parking and green space, impervious surfaces. So we ended up having to do the very costly exercise of underground stormwater management, underground infiltration beds beneath where the parking lots will go. So in an ideal world, if you had a big land development site, you could just have surface drainage, ponds, and collection facilities. Here we didn't have enough land area to do so and treat the water to the appropriate water quality standards. So there's, I guess, about 3 distinct infiltration beds that we've been installing. So it required digging up about 6 feet down below the surface. We did encounter bedrock in a lot of those areas, which has been unfortunate and expensive, but just been dealing with it because we had no other choice. You know, having to go down that far, and then it's basically a zigzag run of, you know, thousands of feet of piping underneath the parking lot that allows the water to be retained there, filtered properly through different sands and other materials, and then has perforations under it that ultimately will be, you know, discharged through back into other piping and through an outfall, a storm outfall. And some of that, if there ever were a large storm surge event, would then overflow to the main pond in the back corner of the site, which is kind of how the system was designed. You can see here a culvert is being put in where that road is wrapped, that access road wraps around the back. That possible dog park would go kind of right over in this area here. So it's neat. It's a lot of site work. It's definitely a lot of site work, and they're doing a great job so far. So this is just a little bit on CAM. Construction, we've been around 60 years, so we've done a lot of work with minority business enterprises, worked with thousands of subs over the years, so always very kind of open to work with new subcontractors. And here's another image of Pontiac Mills, project in Rhode Island. So again, this complex had different facade materials, different buildings, brick and stone and plaster. So. But yeah, thanks for your time, everyone. And
take a few questions. I know there's a lot of eager interest, but we'll take a few questions and then we should repeat them so that everyone can hear what the question is. So yes, in the back.
Ben said that the mill is on the National Register, so when all of this is done, is it still going to be eligible to remain on the National Register?
yeah, absolutely.
So the question.
Yeah, the question was about the mill being on the National Register already, and then in light of us doing this work, would it remain on there in perpetuity? And the answer is most certainly yes. Yeah, that's that designation being in place is what allows us to do what we want to do.